Hi everyone, welcome and welcome back. If you don't know me, my name is Catherine, and if you do know me, I'm so grateful that you can make it here or make it back from wherever it is on the internet that you happen to drop in from. Now I know that I'm exposing myself to a little bit of a beast with this video, but it's okay. I trust that you chose to be here. I chose to be here. We can have a mature and mature, conducive conversation. That being said, I will try to keep my thoughts concise and to the point. I did see your comments in the previous video, and so I will definitely be trying my best. But yeah, without further ado, let's begin.
I'm gonna give my unsolicited take on the whole optics of the BTS situation right now. Situation being their album sucks.
I'm gonna say this and then turn off my phone, I think, but this whole BTS situation is actually a great example of why it was so difficult to root for K-pop demon hunters during award season. There was this expectation that was sometimes silent and was other times stated in such a way that I don't think people realized that's what they were asking for. But there was this expectation that Black Americans would just be willing to set aside the fact that K-pop as an industry is built on the exploitation and appropriation of Black culture, so that Koreans, people within that diaspora, and animation, an art form that is typically discredited, could get their flowers. And I'm sorry, but I find that fucking infuriating.
So we're going to be reading the lyrics to their song Hooligan. ARMY, this is not an opinion of the song. ARMY, this is not an opinion of the song. This is just me reading the lyrics. Watch this beat going hooligan. We pop out, we actin' a fool again. Oh. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 hooligan. Watch this beat going hooligan. Oh. Why this bass line slapping so rude? Drop it lower than chopped and screwed.
Now, when we speak about disillusionment, I can't help but feel that we often confine the term to the conventional theaters where public disappointment most visibly unfolds. Okay, I'm talking politics, I'm talking economic mobility, I'm talking romantic markets, I'm talking all forms and all strains of institutional legitimacy. And yet, I think true disillusionment really remains so politely contained. It migrates. It effectively metastasizes within cultural domains that on the surface seem completely unrelated, but as a fact are structurally dependent. Entertainment markets, for instance, are frequently mistaken as psychologically inert spaces. They are not. In reality, I believe that they function as these soft laboratories of identity formation. And within them, archetypes are prototyped across the attending generation, and symbolic ideals are iterated, again, quite aggressively at scale. What emerges within these environments eventually and inevitably shape our political sensibilities, you guys, our relational expectations. And of course, the aesthetic criteria by which young adults begin to negotiate conceptions of masculinity, femininity, desirability, and power on, like I said, every possible strain and dimension. That is once they eventually enter the social marketplace. The cultural theorist Stuart actually famously argued, and I completely agree with his sentiment. Basically, he argued that popular media does not superficially shape social reality. It actually produces social meaning. Basically, what he's just saying is that narratives that are repeated, often enough, frequently enough, aggressively enough, often acquire rather the authority of lived experience. This sentiment, whether or not you agree with it, is, you guys, it's so crucial to understand, because in this sense, entertainment becomes pedagogical. Okay, it teaches us how to feel, it teaches us how to want, it teaches us what to desire, and perhaps most consequentially, it teaches us how to perform ourselves in anticipation of another's gaze. The feminine gaze, for instance, I believe exerts a quiet but immense gravitational pull upon the masculine ideal. What I'm saying is the direction of affection, of attention, what women romanticize, idealize, celebrate, in effect, gradually sculpts the behavioral vocabulary available, to men in the attending generation. Masculinity, in this sense, becomes a responsive architecture, right? It effectively expands towards the signal it receives. Or, of course, it can reasonably fracture beneath contradictory expectations. And we've seen this happen, we've seriously seen this happen at scale. Basically, the long and short of my rambling of what I'm saying is, long before adults can reasonably articulate their preferences in modern world and modern life, they already have been well disciplined, well supported by narrative ecosystems, film, music, celebrity culture. These environments quietly train the imagination. They shape how vulnerability is calibrated. They inform how desirability is performed, how rebellion and submission are negotiated within not just, romantic life, but socio-political life. The psychological architecture of adulthood is frequently erected upon the fictional architectures of adolescence. And at present, I don't think anyone really would disagree with me when I say we are witnessing cultural disillusionment on multiple dimensions simultaneously. This is the moment we are living in. People are seeing through the cracks and it doesn't feel good. Politics have disappointment, economic promises have thinned. The dating market has become utterly, guys, it's become so rough. It's become utterly fractured and insufferable. Even the entertainment structures that once offered us symbolic refuge at the very least, are themselves beginning to fracture under scrutiny. The K-pop industry, for instance, obviously, the subject of this video, once heralded as this meticulously engineered machine, in fact, a global cultural phenomenon, guys, as we are seeing what is happening right now, it is not immune to this. Now, to be completely transparent with you, I do not claim to be a long time, life devotee of BTS. I'm not part of the ARMY, I'm not part of the fandom, but when a familiar pattern of cultural disillusionment arises, I would simply be lying to you if I said that it did not command my attention.
Because on top of it, nobody from BTS, not even Namjoon, came out to say anything or hold any fans accountable and say, hey, this is not okay. Like, the collaboration happened because we wanted it to happen, because we were excited about it. And then that same fan who had connected Wale and Namjoon completely turned on him. At this point, it's not accidents, it's pattern recognition, it's repeated behaviors, and it's disgusting, and it's just sad. And I know it's hard to accept that your faves are not 100% perfect, but that's no reason to excuse racism!
Patterns of disillusionment, especially so when they erupt across large audiences, they often reveal deeper psychological undercurrents that transcend the specific object of dissatisfaction. And the disappointment circulating within, segments of the BTS ARMY is fascinating precisely because it appears superficially unrelated to the broader cultural anxieties of our time. My founding conviction, my argument is that it mirrors them uncannily. One will not instinctively, assume that the grievances of a K-pop fandom intersect meaningfully with broader cultural discussions, cultural pain points that concern masculinity, identity, racial politics, generational psychology, and yet my conviction is that they do. For one thing, it does not escape me, and it should not escape you, that the original demographic, nucleus of the BTS fandom was and remains to be predominantly female. Industry reports consistently estimate that at least between 70 and 80% of the attending audience do identify as female, particularly concentrated amongst adolescents and young adults. And this matters. It is important for me, you guys, urgently to address this, because the aesthetic and emotional register of BTS helped to crystallize a specific model of masculine desirability, one that is extraordinarily difficult for the modern man to reproduce. The idol archetype represented a man and a masculine entity that was simultaneously emotionally transparent, aesthetically delicate, romantically attentive, sexually confident, artistically expressive, and of course, globally triumphant. This, you guys, is a composite figure whose psychological and aesthetic qualities rarely coexist so effortlessly, so harmoniously in lived reality, in real experience. You don't see these types of, you don't see these ideals in modern life unless you are perpetually living a K-drama. It just doesn't happen. And there's a reason that it is engineered this way. What emerges from this fusion is not just a performer, but also a symbolic masculine ideal that again, the attending generation absorbs. One that operates as less a realistic model and more so an image, a curation, a composite a composite identity assembled from the longings of the audience. The difficulty, of course, is that this projection contains internal contradictions. How emotionally sensitive do you want him to be? How boyishly fragile, yet in the same vein, sexually dominant do you want him to be? For ordinary men attempting desperately to interpret these signals, the idol becomes increasingly diffuse, psychologically unstable, aesthetically contradictory, and obviously practically unattainable. So why am I talking about all of this? Why does this matter? Well, you guys, I don't know about you, but for me personally, when I see an attending generation becoming either more reinforced in their idealization of a certain ideal or alternatively withdrawn from it, I know something is happening. The masculine figure being represented is not merely complex. It is also internally incoherent. That is, it can only really be reasonably transplanted within a fictional type landscape. And we obviously know that it is assembled from fragments of competing emotional expectations. Cultural symbols rarely collapse or rise in mere isolation, They function as mirrors, reflecting deeper psychological negotiations occurring within the generation itself. In specific, when the distinction between symbol and reality remains perpetually unexamined, when fans never get to a point where they start to question, okay, what is it about this entity that has a death grip, okay, like a chokehold on my fantasies and what I idealize?
I fucking hated that album. It felt kind of like a slap in the face to have a bunch of millionaire men saying like, life goes on, guys, life goes on. Like, I'm sure it does for you in your penthouse right now. It became very clear what their new goal was. And their new goal was to basically, like, court the American music industry even harder than they had been. And to get that Grammy. Corporate drones, capitalistic puppets, whatever you want to call them, everything fits.
It is concerning to me when a generation that, then progresses into maturity, does not meaningfully confront, does not meaningfully investigate the illusions that shaped it in its most vulnerable stages, particularly within adolescence. That is to say, if you don't realize, and at some point, like I did in my personal story, okay, for me, I grew up on a lot of classics. I grew up on a lot of books. Those are what shaped me. It wasn't necessarily musical entertainment, but it was just as affecting. It was just as transformative to my psychology. It was books, okay? And in particular, Peter Pan. I used to love Peter Pan. I adored Peter Pan. But if you don't eventually realize that Peter Pan is not an ideal, that whatever it is that informs Peter Pan's chaos is pathological, then I think something is wrong. I think something, at the very least, is stunted. It therefore becomes important that in reference to Peter Pan, we define what I mean, what the general conversation addresses when we talk about the typical masculine ideal that instantiates in media, in popular media, specifically the kind that obviously appeals most to women. Effectively, the most poignant image of the masculine ideal. Peter Pan, or any modern instantiation of the volatile yet really charming, bad boy personality, is not just mischievous and exciting and sometimes, darkly intelligent. He is also the standing archetype of eternal adolescence. He is charming, he is volatile, he appears everywhere. I'm going to insert some examples just so that you understand what I'm speaking to, but I know some of you don't even need the pictures. You already have an image in your mind. But yes, I mean, he's unique in the sense that he has this unique capacity to transform the subject of his affections into a new world, into an alternative fantasy. He can snatch you up, this stressed damsel in distress into a Neverland, into an architecture that is so much more bearable, that is so much more tolerable than your lived reality, your lived experiences, your lived stresses. There's a seduction to him, but there's also a relief to him. He has the supernatural capacity to transport those who adore him beyond the limitations of modern life. In this sense, Peter Pan represents the symbolic location where romantic intensity and sexual charisma effortlessly coexist with a refusal to resign fully from boyhood. He indulges in the emotional intensities of adulthood. I'm talking jealousy, rivalry, longing, sex, but he is permanently insulated from the responsibilities that typically accompany those emotions, those activities. And such archetypes are developmentally understandable attractions during periods of psychological experimentation, which obviously characterizes what we endure during adolescence, during puberty. Retaining attraction to figures that are not merely unrealistic, but also structurally insulated from the consequences of their indulgence is very much normal. It is very much expected. I don't think there's anything wrong with that at that particular stage in life. Attachment to a figure who never really gets burned by their indulgences, and we can limit those to, well, we can describe those two, but not exhaustively limit those indulgences to sexual access, emotional volatility, moral asymmetry, or at the very least, if they're not, overtly burned by these indulgences or by the consequences of these indulgences, then the actual experience of indulging certain immature, not so helpful behaviors is aestheticized. It looks romantic, it looks dangerous, it looks intoxicating. And so basically the whole idea is that it's not something that you are afraid of upon listening to their upon listening to them ruminate and create artistic work that develops the intoxications of those experiences. My argument, though, would be that the persistence of attraction to these archetypes beyond true adulthood, right, into a stage where you should be mature, especially without questioning why and what desires informed them, that is concerning. That is where I think we have a problem. Any cursory examination of these exampled archetypes lyrics from Drake to Harry Styles to BTS, again, there are many examples, reveals that the emotional vocabulary circulating within these artists' worlds, within these idols' worlds, remains very narrow, very predictable. It always, in some sense, recurses around sex, money, heartbreak, and revenge. The emotional cycles embedded within these lyrics, embedded even within these music videos, orbit usually the same thematic centers with a near, and in my opinion, a sort of sad mechanical repetition.
After much thought and much listening, I've come to the conclusion that the album is indeed awful. And a lot of you are going to come at me for this, but I don't really care because I've been a fan for years. I've listened to every single thing that they've put out, and this is just not it. And I have two main reasons why. First of all, BTS is known for their lyrics. It's intelligent, there's a lot of wordplay, there's hidden meanings, there's metaphors. What the hell is this? What is this? You want me to believe that you guys took 2 years or whatever to come up with this? There's an interview where Yoongi says that, AI is used in writing these days and we start to accept it. Apparently they didn't use it or they did use it. I don't know, but this definitely looks like AI.
From a literary standpoint, the structure is strikingly simple. Like I said, almost adolescent in its conceptual range.
You gon' hear this one playing round the clock. Yeah, round the clock. Round the clock. Clock, clock, clock. Why this bass line slapping so rude? Drop it lower than chopped and screwed. 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 Hooligan. Watch this beat going hooligan.
But the philosophical depth rarely extends beyond the emotional preoccupations of early adulthood. In fact, saying early adulthood is a little bit of a generous diagnosis. It is very, again, just my opinion, it is very juvenile. Even the way sex is described and, indulged in, it is very, And so something fascinating happens when an audience suddenly finds themselves dissatisfied or disillusioned with their beloved artist's newest release. When the symbolic architecture collapses, right? When the enchantment fades, we are witnessing more than just a superficial dissatisfaction with the quality of a work, with the quality of an artistic piece that once had resonance within the generation, but suddenly doesn't. We are witnessing the attending generation confront the widening distance between the art that once shaped shaped them and the world that now awaits them. Created by J.M. Barrie in the early 20th century, Peter Pan embodies the ideal of eternal boyhood. He is aesthetically youthful, he is charming, he is adventurous, he is emotionally expressive, but he's also volatile. He also, you guys, has a shadow. He has a dark side. He has an aggressive side. He has an indulgent side. And as it concerns modern K-pop, one of the primary criticisms was not merely the lyrical indulgence of sex. I don't think most people actually had an issue with that, because that is very much like, I don't really have an issue with that. I feel like I feel like there's a skillfulness, there's an artistry that can be imbued into descriptions of highly vulnerable, highly intimate emotional states like sex. But again, that wasn't most people's issue. The issue was the artlessness. The issue was the laziness. The issue was, honestly, it looked like it was written by ChatGPT. Like it just, the lyrics felt so stale and so insultingly dry that it was like, this could have been an email, really.
Trouble in understanding the music and trouble speaking to the directors because there was a language barrier. The members didn't understand English. How do you name an album Arirang and then you go ahead and make an album full of English music when the members can't even speak or understand English fluently? And English is not a sign of intelligence or success, but if you don't know the language, you don't know the language. Why would you make music in that?
Screwed. Screwed. Hooligan. Watch this beat. Going hooligan.
Yet the defining tragedy of J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan is not, simply that he refuses to grow up. This is not Barrie's most devastating insight. It is Peter's inability to remember the people who loved him. Barrie writes that Peter forgets the lost boys, he forgets about Wendy. Memory, after all, as we know, as we appreciate, is the foundation of responsibility. To remember someone, you guys, is to meaningfully acknowledge that your life intersects with theirs in ways that impose moral continuity. Peter Pan cannot permit such continuity, and so he forgets. And the reason I'm drawing this connection is because the idol archetype embodies a similar structure, a similar behavior. Fans form deeply emotional, deeply intimate attachments to idols, to role models who sing about vulnerability, about longing, about devotion, about heartbreak, and it's deeply emotionally resonant. Yet the relationship itself remains structurally asymmetrical, and it's important, you guys, it's so important that I lay emphasis on that word, asymmetrical, because asymmetry describes not merely a difference in participation, but a difference in emotional investment, in cultural recognition, and in symbolic reciprocity. The sociologist Pierre Bourdieu, he wrote, and putting aside my opinions about him, a broken clock has its moments, okay? We'll get into him in a later video, but he did quite accurately write that cultural systems operate through invisible economies of prestige, systems in which admiration, imitation, and symbolic capital circulate unevenly between communities. One group may contribute disproportionately to the to the aesthetic vocabulary whilst receiving far less institutional recognition in return.
It's very clear that they only care about Black people and their culture in how it can make them money and make them look cool. But that's kind of where it stops. Be yourself. I say that, but then at the same time, like, this is them. Maybe they just are cultural appropriators at the end of the day. Well, they are cultural appropriators at the end of the day, but I fear that might be it. Cultural appropriators, corporate drones, capitalistic puppets, whatever you want to call them, everything fits.
So naturally, the other prickly dimension unfolding in these different complexions of disillusionment, as we're discussing, as it pertains to BTS, and that I feel urgent to address, is the unusual and the complex relationship between Korean K-pop culture and Black audiences.
Maybe I'm wrong for thinking this, and y'all can let me know if I'm tweaking, but I always just assumed that Black K-pop fans were okay with racism and being disrespected. Because as someone who's not into K-pop, every couple months I see some type of controversy or racist moment that always has something to do with Black people or Black culture. I'm seeing right now that people are mad that the group BTS, apparently they have an animation going around where they're telling the story of 7 Korean students over at Howard University, but when they show the depiction of what Howard University looks like, it is a very whitewashed version. And I have seen a lot of videos on my timeline of black K-pop fans mad about this, saying, I can't believe they whitewashed our history. I'm so done with this. I can't do this. And I'm just so confused about why they're mad. Like, I can understand why a normal person would be mad, but a black K-pop fan, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't this a billion-dollar industry built off of stealing from black culture, using black aesthetics, using black sounds, and then also being racist towards black people and disrespecting black people? And this isn't my opinion. I've seen multiple videos of Korean people saying out their own mouths that this is what the industry has done for years. I remember there was a little time period a couple years ago, I was talking to this girl. She was really into K-pop and she was trying to get me into it. And I said, okay, I know there's like different generations. I'll look into it and see where to start. I did about 5 minutes of research and found countless, and I mean countless examples of these K-pop groups stealing from black artists, from their mannerisms, to the way they dress, to the sound of the music. Quite literally, some songs were literally copy and paste. Oh, I'm sorry, they weren't stealing, they were taking inspiration, as the K-pop fans like to say. Black K-pop fans have to be okay with racism because it's so embedded into K-pop, you find it without even looking. I remember back when season 2 of Squid Game came out, I made a video saying, yo, I've never heard of this dude Top before, but I just found out about his story. It's so crazy, he never would have got canceled if he was in America. And a bunch of his fans were commenting under the video saying, man, you never heard of Big Bang? You gotta go listen to them. They're like K-pop royalty. Did about 5 minutes of research, G-Dragon in blackface. G-Dragon in blackface, and apparently they call this guy like the godfather of K-pop, yet black K-pop fans are, talking about racism.
The controversy surrounding the depiction of Howard University within that music video introduced another layer of emotional resonance and irritation within, well, not just irritation, honestly, downright anger within the attending audience, within the fan base. It is one that is so sensitive because it recurses against the complex and interesting history of cultural exchange between Korean culture and black audiences. Basically, one party appears to embrace the other culture with remarkable enthusiasm, absorbing its music, its aesthetics, its fashion, its language, its choreography with genuine admiration.
In my opinion, you can't do a reimagining of history if the reimagining does not deepen our understanding of that history. I had time, so I paused that BTS video, and they show 58 people in that crowd scene, or in the 2 crowd scene, and there are only 14 black people shown at Howard University in 1896.
So let me give you some historical context of how these 7 teenage boys ended up at Howard University, a legacy HBCU. So these were teenage boys who were from noble families, okay? They were very privileged. They stole money and they escaped Korea. They somehow ended up in Vancouver and through their connections found another exiled Korean man living in DC. Now at the time, Korea was going through its own problems. It's going through its own shit, right? This is 1896. Russia wanted Korea, China wanted Korea, and of course Japan, because when did Japan not want Korea? Am I right? Because of separate but equal, the only school that would accept these 7 Korean students was Howard University. The only problem was that they didn't speak a lick of English. They enroll in Howard University. Fast forward to the summer, this lady, Ann Fletcher, I don't know how she gets into the picture. Like, I don't know if she was a staff member at Howard University, but she invites 3 of the students into her home in DC, and she records them singing Korean arirang, which is Korean folk song. And this is officially the first recording of arirang. And now you can find that recording at the Library of Congress in DC.
Whilst unfortunately, the reciprocity of that embrace seems constrained, it often appears more cautious. Sometimes it is structurally absent. And I'm just gonna say it seems racist. And this is not an aesthetic observation, as many fans have rightly observed. It reflects a historical pattern embedded within global cultural exchange. For decades, the relationship between K-pop and black fans has been marked by a very interesting asymmetry. K-pop itself emerged within the 1990s, and particularly amidst the fusion of Western musical genres. Most notably, African-American hip-hop and R&B traditions. Scholars of transnational media have frequently noted that the rhythmic structures, the vocal stylings, the dance choreography, and the performance aesthetics foundational to traditional K-pop and obviously, even modern K-pop, draw heavily from black musical innovation. Yet, I think that cultural borrowing on both ends, because I don't think this happens as a one-way thing. I do think that this is two-way. I do believe this to be an activity that is engaged with between both parties. I don't think that it just happens as a one-way thing. I think this is very much dynamic, and I actually think it is healthy, but that's, anyway. Look, it's a result of cultural cohesion and existence when, people migrate and end up attending the same worlds, experiencing the same way of life for whatever reason. Point is, cultural borrowing often exists within a broader hierarchy of global prestige. What becomes celebrated aesthetically does not always translate to equal cultural recognition or representation within the institutions producing that art. This tension has periodically surfaced within and throughout the history of all of pop culture, from jazz to rock to hip-hop, even contemporary digital music, ecosystems. The question is not whether or not cultural exchange occurs. You guys, cultural exchange will always occur. If you are overly sensitive about the fact that this is a reality, I think I think you need to go home and drink some milk because it is what it is, and cultural exchange has always been the engine of artistic evolution. The question is how that cultural exchange is being absorbed, is being interpreted by the communities whose cultural forms are being adopted in real time. And when controversies arrive, whether involving racial language, stereotypes, or dismissive representation, fans who once felt culturally embraced may experience something closer to symbolic rejection. Psychologically, discrimination is rarely ever experienced as just as impersonal disagreement. Guys, it cuts to your core and it hits hard. It is experienced as rejection on an unfair premise, and as we all know, as some of us have really suffered for, I definitely have, rejection stings the most when it arrives from those whom we believe we had embraced first. As it concerns the controversy surrounding the way Howard University was depicted in that music video, the emotional reaction from many of the Black fans can be summarized in a deeply human sentiment. We loved you when others mocked you. We defended you when the Western industry dismissed you. We celebrated your success, both intellectual success and artistic success, as if it were our own. So how can you be so shameless, so egregious, so transparent, so unrepentant actually in your contempt for the demographic that first loved you? Critics and fans alike have repeatedly pointed to moments in which K-pop performers have adopted historically charged racial imagery or language, and as we've been seeing for a while, this ranges across a multitude of sins, sometimes including the use of the N-word, blackface imagery, or caricatured stylistic imitations. And the reason it reads to many as so egregiously shameless and offensive is because it's often without any meaningful addressal or awareness of the historical weight that for many these symbols do carry. Most recently, controversy surrounding groups such as Cat's Eye, the only black member, there's an only black member within the group Cat's Eye, and there's been controversy around that. It further ignited conversations and frustrations about representation, about racism, tokenism, and cultural visibility within global K-pop systems. My point is, each incident in isolation may appear very, very minor, but they do collectively accumulate. They do form a pattern. And if you're very emotionally attached to this industry and to what it represents, I'm again being completely transparent. I'm not, and so my anger isn't really quite there, but I do understand the grievance. I do understand the disillusionment and the disappointment. These patterns, once they emerge, once they become overexposed, they do begin to reshape perception. And yes, I do think that they engender a severe form of disillusionment within the attending generation. Now, the reason Peter Pan carries a particular and a very subjectively effective weight within this discussion, at least for me, is because his story also reflects a personal trajectory of disillusionment. There was a time, like I said earlier, that I really loved Peter Pan. I grew up immersed in the imaginative world constructed by writers whose stories shaped the emotional grammar of my childhood. In those early years, I also wrestled with the intuitions of the bad boy. Again, we're extending the Peter Pan archetype to this this generalized ideal of male desirability. But yes, I tackled with the perennial question of why women feel drawn to men who are so volatile, who are so boyishly fragile yet aggressive. But a strange that strange dichotomy. I was always so intrigued by it, and intrigued by why it pulled on certain attractions. The figure of Peter Pan definitely seems to embody this paradox, a boyish rebel whose charm lies precisely in his refusal to become the traditional expectation. He rests in this liminal gap between innocence and sexual exploration, freedom. He is such an emotionally charged and expressive character, and so whenever, as I do every reread Peter Pan, obviously as an adult, particularly when I read the other novel, the one about Peter and Wendy, my enchantment always gives way to a different realization entirely. It's this bittersweet nostalgia, but it's also this, again, but the disillusionment had to come first. I first had to recognize that there's something not right about this. There's something not quite okay about both whatever it is that informs Peter Pan's volatility and my attraction towards him. And once the disillusionment sets in, the attraction dies. It goes away. In particular, the boy who once seemed to represent freedom now is exposed for being profoundly incapable of reciprocity. The tragedy of Peter Pan is not simply that he refuses to grow up. The tragedy is that he cannot remember the people who loved him first. And that realization mirrors the emotional trajectory, experienced by many fans when their idols cease to resemble the figures they once admired. He exists now as a product of choreography, of corporate narrative, of aesthetic engineering. And the moment that realization dawns, a generation confronts something far larger than the disappointment of a music video. It confronts the disillusion of an illusion. Another layer of disillusionment occurs when audiences begin to perceive the machinery behind the mythology. The global K-pop industry is among one of the most among one of the most meticulously engineered entertainment systems in the world. What we're witnessing is not just a particular frustration with a music video or dissatisfaction with the quality of artistic output. Rather, we are seeing the attending generation arrive at a developmental threshold where the ideals cultivated during adolescence are beginning to collide with the structural realities of the industries that produce them. The idol, once imagined as an autonomous or emotionally authentic figure, becomes recognizable in a vast industrial apparatus, and in particular an apparatus governed by contracts, training regimes, aesthetic regulation, corporate choreography. I mean, we know the testimonies, we know the accounts of former trainees. They have repeatedly documented the severity of the system, the abuse of the system. Prospective idols undergo years of training under restrictive contracts, a structure sometimes referred to in South Korea as the quote-unquote slave contract. It is a controversy that has sparked major legal disputes, particularly within the late 2000s. And, schedules can extend well beyond 16-hour working days. Personal relationships, dating behavior, and everything in between is policed. Many describe this feeling as evidence that everything that was once joyful, everything that brought us escapism and safe familiarity with everything that brought us safe familiarity with the issues and the experiences of adult life when we were not at the age to experience adult life. Like, for example, deep, very intense, intimate relationships, revenge, turmoil. Basically, the music we grew up on or used to listen to in, those fragile years of adolescence, they brought us a lot of joy, a lot of catharsis, it brought us a safe way to view the adult world from a place where we didn't experience the moral consequences for indulging in a lot of the actions described in this type of music. But basically the feeling in becoming so disenchanted with these artists is that everything once joyful, imaginative, or emotionally meaningful is gradually dissolving into a depressing kind of cynicism. Everything once relieving and pure is fading away. But I would argue humbly that this interpretation misunderstands the more urgent function of disillusionment, especially so for me as a person of faith. My earnest encouragement is that if you are experiencing disillusionment, some of you are fine. Some of you are very much at peace with, and it's, some people decide to distance themselves and put their heads in the sand, and that is absolutely their prerogative. Look, keep your peace, whatever means necessary. But others are not really quite there. And my encouragement is that this feeling, it's not a tragedy. It doesn't have to be necessary. It doesn't have to be interpreted as a tragedy. Disillusionment forces a generation to examine itself. It forces women and men to re-examine the romantic archetypes, the archetypes of behavior, of idealism that we absorb during our years of adolescence. It forces audiences to re-examine the cultural alliances that they once believed were permanent. The process is uncomfortable because it requires, confronting the fragility of narratives that once we believed were emotionally secure. And that discomfort is precisely the fear that Peter himself spends his entire life avoiding. Peter does not merely refuse adulthood. He refuses to acknowledge that time changes everything. People grow older, desires evolve, allegiances shift, heroes disappoint, and reality moves forward whether we want it to or not. So Peter remains in Neverland, circling endlessly around the same adventures, the same conflicts, the same illusions. He forgets that he never has to grow. And yes, a generation is disillusioned on many intersecting dimensions, but this invites us to realize that yes, we can stay like Peter. We can refuse to recognize how superficial and frail much of what we loved was, or we can grow up. This is an invitation to a new world, and that's the thing about growing up. That's the thing about maturity. You can't keep you can't keep recursing against the same world, against the same desires forever. There are new realms of excitement and relationship to explore. There are new milestones that await this new stage of life, and you're allowed rather to be excited about those things, to be excited about new things. You're allowed now to be excited about the possibility of exploring maturer versions of masculinity and femininity that aren't playful, sexually indulgent games, but rather functionally consequential for society. It takes me back to why you're familiar with the YouTubers you used to watch when you were 12 or when you were 10, but now at 20, 30, 40, I don't know. My demographic is very wide, but you can look back on those things with nostalgia, but not necessarily with the same experiential investment you had when you were that age. The disappointment about BTS is not simply about a music release, because it's been a while, okay? The attending generation has undergone puberty. They have grown up. I think the disillusionment is about realizing that the figures who once shaped their romantic imaginations back then were never meant to be lived reality. They were performances, and all performances at some point must come to an end. So that is all I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll hopefully see you soon. We'll see again. Sometimes it really does just depend. I was not planning on making this video because I don't know. I don't know what I will attract, but I genuinely hope you enjoyed it. I will see you hopefully very soon, maybe with something shorter, something like, let me not make promises because who knows. So yeah, I will see you hopefully very soon. Feel free to comment, let me know your thoughts. If you have anything else to contribute to the conversation. Otherwise, I'm available on Instagram. I have an email. You can pop me a message. Oh, and Ko-fi if you want to support me, if you want to help a girl out, because Lord knows we all need it in this economy. But thank you so much for joining me, for having patience with me, for listening to me. You take care. God bless, and goodbye.